The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. Cheryl Hentz here along with Dan Rylance, and we're very happy to welcome back again a regular guest on this show, Winnebago County Executive Mark Harris. And Mark is here because we're just going to talk about kind of a hodgepodge of things, budgets and road assessments and unpaid taxes, and it runs the gamut. I want to first thank you for being very flexible a couple weeks ago when we had you scheduled originally, and then all hell broke loose with the city manager's performance and talks and all this kind of stuff, and you were very flexible. So
well, I'm glad to be here tonight.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's just jump right into the fray here. One of the first things I want to find out about is Parkview Health Center. Is it on schedule as far as construction? I know that there was an issue about like $290,000, just under $300,000 for a sprinkler system that had to be installed. But other than that, is it budgetarily on track? Where are we at with?
Yeah, I think we're pretty much on track with it. We're expecting it to be done in February, a little later than we initially had hoped for. And the issue you're talking about has to do with the gables on the roof.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Basically, there's mechanicals on the roof of the nursing home, and by law, you're required to screen them. So these gables are more cosmetic, but they're required by law than anything else. And with nursing homes, once you go to a second story, you're required to build them out of fireproof materials. For whatever reason, the architect felt that because these gables were on the exterior of a fireproof concrete building, that they did not have to be fireproof. And initially, both the state and the city approved the plans indicating that the lumber inside these gables would not be fireproof, although the exterior of the gables was fireproof. Mm-hmm. There was actually no access to the interior of the gables. And again, they're on the outside of a fireproof structure. But the city inspector, on giving it further thought, decided that these really should have been made out of fireproof lumber. And we had about half of them up, so the other half that aren't up yet are going to be constructed out of fireproof lumber. It is quite a bit more expensive, but we're going to do that. We're really still working with the state to determine how we can mitigate the ones that are already up. I mean, a worst case scenario would be if we had to tear them off and do new ones, because that would cause a delay. And delay is expensive to me. The county will be getting additional reimbursements for Medicaid once we're in the new nursing home, because part of the formula for determining Medicaid, it's different for every nursing home. Part of the formula is your depreciation and your interest expense. Mm-hmm. So between that and between savings that we can get in employment once we're working out of a single building instead of two, I think it cost about $4,000 a day in lost opportunity on savings for delay. So I'm anxious for this to get resolved. I'm hoping we don't have to tear off those gables that are up. There's a number of things being considered. One possibility is spraying fireproof material on the inside of this lumber in the gables, but the question there is, then the edges will not be sprayed. Well, I don't know that makes a difference in substance, but maybe it makes a difference in enforcing the code. Another possibility was sprinkler systems, but it's not really clear what the state is going to require. What we had the board do is go ahead and vote the amount of money that it would take for adding the sprinklers, which is probably one of the most expensive ways to go. But that way we can keep this project moving, because if we waited to resolve what's the solution and then ask the board for the money, that delay in time might slow down the project and cost us more in delays than anything else. the construction manager has already offered to pitch in a substantial amount of money. I think it was $56,000. Not directly because of the decision of the architect to use the lumber that wasn't fireproof, but because they feel they could have addressed the issue quicker. So they're saying, look, $56,000 represents the opportunity cost with the delay, and we're willing to pitch that into the pot. When we find out what the state is going to require us to do, we'll measure the difference between constructing the gables out of fireproof materials from the beginning and whatever solution we actually employ. And I think we'll be able to collect that from the architect and the construction manager.
Well, what a nice thing for the architect to do. Boy, you don't hear about that in today's society very often.
Well, I don't have the money in my hands, but
Well-
I'm quite confident that they want us to be happy with the project.
Well, sure.
And other than this one item, in truth, I am. I don't know if you've seen the nursing home. You get a really good view of it from the park. It's going to be very nice. Just today, we ran through the P&F committee a gift from the Oshkosh Foundation, where the rooms in the nursing home had to be really tight because we're working on a tight budget, but we didn't want to go below 168 rooms. So the room size had to get smaller and smaller to fit within the constraints the board set. And then we started thinking that, so many of our residents are in these oversized wheelchairs as Americans get heavier. And our residents often are quite ill, and that's one of the reasons we might have them is because their health is in such a condition that they can't go to the other nursing homes. Well, you start putting, some medical equipment like an oxygen tank in the room, and you take an oversized wheelchair, and we were worried that these rooms were too tight. So we approached the Oshkosh Foundation and some other foundations. Could they help us with a little money to stretch the size of these rooms? Well, none of them wanted to contribute money to bricks and mortar. But Eileen Kindly-Kiesler over at the Oshkosh Foundation said we had a mocked-up room, and we had a TV stand with a TV on it. And Eileen said, well, what if you got the TV up on the wall? And we said, well, if it sticks out from the wall more than a certain number of inches, the code requires you to have it up at about 7 foot. And that's not good for the residents to try and be watching a TV that high up. She said, well, what if we got you flat screen TVs?
Wow.
That would free up the floor space and solve that problem. And another problem it solves is, we have double occupancy rooms in the current nursing home. And most of our residents are indigent. They have no money. So if we split them up to private rooms, half of them would have no TV and no way to obtain one. So the foundation is coming up with 168 flat screen TVs for the nursing home. Frees
How
up that floor
wonderful.
space, is going to give everybody a nice large TV they can see. And we're actually looking for other donors. We want to hook up a closed circuit system so that if we have events in the chapel community area, that we can put those on closed circuit so that those people who don't feel they can come out of bed to go down to that area themselves can still be part of that over closed circuit. So we're still seeking a donor for that part of it, but we've actually gotten a lot of donations to help us make this a really quality
Well,
facility.
how wonderful.
Truly.
That really is. So February of 2008 is when you're looking at being finished and opening?
If there's no further unexpected delays, we'll get in February, and we're already planning that move. That's a big deal because by law, we have to transfer the license on a single day. So we could do each building on a separate day, but you've got to move everybody from one building to the other building on the same day.
I was going to ask you about that, Mark. How do you go about transporting that number of patients from one place to another? I mean, what are you planning for that?
We're going to have the fire department, we're going to have the emergency management department. We're going to have a lot of players involved in this, and the state will have inspectors down there to observe it. And I believe we're actually getting some grant money by treating it as an evacuation exercise, under Homeland Security. And it truly is, because if you had to do an evacuation of Oshkosh because of some sort of chemical accident or something like that, you have to be able to evacuate the nursing home. So we're making our move also be an evacuation exercise to kind of get the most efficiency out of it. And really all the players in Oshkosh and with the county have agreed to participate. So it's going to be a big exercise, and I think it'll come off well.
All right, excellent.
Voters of Winnebago County elected you in part, I think, because they wanted change. And so I want to ask the big picture. What has changed, and what would you identify as some of your major accomplishments since you become county executive?
We've stopped the gradual erosion of the reserves with the county. Those are now up about $3 million from where I started. We've managed to reduce the operating tax rate each year,
Okay.
although the total tax rate has not changed much because we've been bonding for things like Parkview and some of the major road projects like County AP and County Y. We're now got a project going on E. So the total tax rate's been relatively flat, but the operating rate has come down. And in fact, we now have about 6% less employees than we did when I started. And we're probably back to a level of employment that we had 15 or 16 years ago. So I think I've gotten some efficiencies out of the county. I've got us on a little bit stronger financial position despite some tough budgetary restrictions that we're operating under. And we're getting things done. You know, things like Parkview, it seems like they could be dragged on forever without moving forward. And I think I've kind of been a catalyst that once we decide on a direction, I seem to have some influence with the board to keep them moving. It takes some compromise, and that's fine. That's the way it should be. But I think I've been able to work better with the board at actually getting things to move
Are
forward.
you enjoying the job?
I love it.
You do.
I feel like all my life experiences up to this point have kind of just fit in perfect to do this job. You know, a lot of it is managing people, a lot of it's budgetary and financial. My background as a CPA fits in there. You know, there's ordinances, and my law degree, my practice of law for a short time fits in well there. And I even like, there's a part of my job that's kind of optional, but there's a lobbyist part of it. And I've had some real successes there. I think I was a significant player, along with all of the Assembly and the Senate, in getting a loophole in the law that was going to let a lot of manufacturers off the property tax rolls and spread their burden back onto the homeowners.
Right.
It was called the Newark loophole. I played a role in kind of pushing that.
Newark is a company?
Yes, Newark
Okay.
was a company, I believe they use recycled paper to make cardboard boxes down in Milwaukee. And they found a 1953 law
Of course.
that was talking about pollution abatement facilities. But in there was a little phrase that said pollution included sawdust, wood chips, and paper residue. Kind of the recipe for paper pulp. So all of a sudden you had all these paper companies saying, you know what, we're not paper companies, we're pollution abatement facilities. And they were asking to have all their property taxes waived. And in fact, in this county, SCA Tissue had come off the rolls briefly. But this change in the law that and you have to give credit to the Assembly and the Senate, people like Gordon Hentz and Dean Coffert and Senator Coles, I think, was really the biggest leader in this. Senator Hansen was actually the first one. But all those people were important players. And they now changed the law to block this loophole, which is what they should have done.
Just out of curiosity, did the vote on that pretty much fall along party lines, or no?
No, actually, and again, all those people are important, but Senator Hansen was actually the first one to push this.
Senator from Green Bay.
Yes. It actually was unanimous in both the Senate and the Assembly. But the trick was getting this issue pushed to the forefront, because you know the loss of property taxes is an issue that doesn't confront the people at the state level. So there just seemed to be this inertia, and it really wasn't until Senator Hansen picked it up and joined with Senator Coles and some of the others that it finally started to move. And had they waited one more day to pass it, then all those companies that had come off the tax rolls would be off for one more year, with devastating effects on the city of Menasha and the Menasha School District, and smaller effects on Winnebago County and other counties.
Wow.
Do I sense from your happiness that you're going to run again?
Oh, I'm sure I will run again for
Okay.
this position.
Just get
Because
that up.
that's been sort of bandied about on
Yeah,
some of the
yeah,
blogs
yeah.
as far as whether or not you were going to run again, and so now
We know
we've
the answer.
confirmed that The contract for the county's emergency management director, Don Wilmot, is not being renewed. It would have renewed sometime this month. Now, when you and I first talked, you had said you don't want to get into specifics about why his contract wasn't renewed. We certainly respect that. The deputy director, Linda Coleman, is that how
Yes.
it's pronounced? Coleman? She is, stepping up to the plate here, and she's the new director. Has she actually been appointed yet?
Yes,
or-
she's been approved
Okay.
by the board as the new
Okay.
director.
All right. So with that, now, are you hiring another deputy director then to replace her?
Well, Linda will be in charge of finding a new deputy director.
Okay.
Now, she's taken over all of the former director's duties and retained a significant portion of her old duties. So she will probably hire someone at less than full time, perhaps 3/4 time. And that was her suggestion, and I think it's a good one. So I think we'll be a little bit more efficient. And of course, we have to look for those opportunities everywhere we can find them.
We're not sacrificing any safety, though, for cost savings, are we? Because, that office is a pretty important job.
Yes, I don't think we are. Actually, I think we're probably going to have a little bit stronger emergency management department than we had in the past.
Okay, all right.
You've lost human resource person too?
Yes, Fred Bow has retired,
Okay.
and just today we made an offer to a candidate, and we're waiting to hear if she accepts it as the new human resource director. We also have a human service director that's returning to Green Bay.
Oh, maybe that was. Now, when these long-term employees leave, what sort of payoffs do they get in terms of accrued sick leave? That's an issue in other counties. Are these people leaving with big packages?
Well, because some of them haven't had enough time in with us to retire,
Okay.
they would get those at a greatly reduced amount.
Okay.
You only get the full payout
If you've been there a long time.
if you've been there long enough and it's a
Okay.
retirement rather than a departure.
Okay.
And remember, I froze those December 31st, 2005. All the non-represented employees, everyone outside the unions, had their sick time payouts frozen based on the number of days they had already accumulated at that time. And it also froze the pay rate that they were computed at. So
The
even
impact
as
isn't as great as it would have been if you wouldn't have done that.
that's right, because the way it works, when you retire, they take the number of sick days you've built up till then at the pay that you were earning then, except now that I put the freeze in, they take the number of days they accumulated by 12/31/05, and they price them out at the 12/31/05 wages, even if someone retires 10 years from now at a much higher wage. So I kind of froze that benefit for them. We did try and talk about that in the union contracts, but we're under meat arbitration, and that was not one of the things that the union wanted to deal with.
I'm sure not.
Okay.
Just a couple of quick ones.
Sure.
There's some blog activity about House Bill 811 introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives about voting machines. Are you up to speed on that, or?
Not on that specific bill, but
Okay.
I would assume that probably has something to do with these electronic voting machines, some
Yeah.
of which leave a paper trail or some of which don't.
Basically, and this is chatter and not affirmative, that the new Debo voting machine would simply be unsuitable for voting if this bill passes. And that the AutoMark machine, which was not purchased by Winnebago County, with this new statute, which hasn't passed yet, would be permissible. Any comment on that?
Well, that is interesting.
Yeah.
The county didn't select that machine. That was selected by the town clerks. The county was acting as their agent
Right.
to purchase the machines they wanted.
That's true. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
But I do have problems with the electronic voting machines. And now, the one we have does produce a paper trail, but you have to look at this receipt through a magnifying panel. And supposedly these machines were to help handicapped people vote. A lot of it is aimed at vision impaired people.
Right.
If you're visually impaired, you're not going to be able to check this receipt.
Right.
And the Diebold company has had some problems with failures where that receipt doesn't advance between voters, so it prints over itself. So, and then In some jurisdictions where the tape hasn't matched the voting record, the courts have said you can't compare the two because it puts the election in jeopardy. But the real risk with these electronic voting machines is a type of mischief they had in Sarasota, Florida, where a clever person through ballot design can have an impact on the outcome. In Sarasota, one race per page, but when they got to the congressional race, in some cases it was combined with another race. And so they had the congressional race on just 2 lines at the very top of the page. Well, imagine a lot of people in Florida looking at these machines through bifocals, where they can't see well through the top of their glasses. They have to look through the bottom of their glasses. They simply ignored the top of that ballot and voted for the race below it. So they had this enormous undervote for Congress in one county. The other county's ballot, 2 counties involved in the congressional district, their ballot was set up different. They combined a different race with the Attorney General's race. And they had to undervote there.
Maybe that's why this bill also, again, chatter includes a provision that in close congressional races, 2%, 3%, there would be an automatic recount of 10% of the ballots cast for that race.
But again, if through ballot design they can cause error, and if they set up the ballot different in different portions of a congressional district, they still have the ability to manipulate it. It's not that it's not correctly recording the information, but the ballot can be set up to cause undervotes in one area and not undervotes in the same race in another. So it is subject to mischief, and the country's become so partisan. I think some mischief has taken place.
Yeah. And such close elections.
Yeah.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
Going back to employees, and directors and so forth, we're into August now. I think back in April, you had appointed Peter, and I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. Moll. Okay. I wanted to say that instead of Moll, I believe, isn't it?
Yes.
I wanted to say Moll instead of Mole.
Yeah, I wouldn't have pronounced it that way. Yeah, Moll.
But how is he working out? How's that going? And how is the airport doing overall?
I think he's another person who just loves that job. He took the deputy job under Ruth just because that was his dream job. I've gotten a lot of favorable feedback on him from tenants at the airport and from EAA. Yet he's still doing the same things that had to be done, raising the lease payments and trying to make the airport balance. I think over the long term, we're going to be real happy with him. He's also looking for a deputy director. He had someone lined up that's got a lot of experience, and I think it's the same type of thing where, the compensation isn't going to be at the level you would expect someone with that kind of background, because they have degrees in aviation management. But he's got someone who's retiring, I believe, from another aviation-related position that will probably come into that number 2 position. But again, he's not in place yet, so I probably need to be discreet.
Sure.
I have a follow-up question on that.
Absolutely.
It's been brought to my attention that you authorized $100,000 for new air conditioners in the Whitman building. Did you, and is there anyone ever in there that?
Yeah, we've got tenants actually in those
Oh, you do?
offices
Okay.
in the airport. There's a rental car company, there's the charter air company. There's tenants in there,
Okay.
and the boilers on the roof are really old technology from when the airport was first built, past their normal life expectancy. Well, metal shavings are showing up in the oil, so we know it's on its last legs. I don't think they've got the new units in, but they have to put a new unit in. But the new units consume so much less energy. We're actually probably doing something we should have done, whether the old unit was failing or not. But there's not passenger flights out of that terminal. But there's aviation and travel related businesses in a lot of the offices.
What about the new tower? Is that on, and who pays for that?
That's federal money.
Okay.
It's not county money. And my understanding, it is on schedule.
Okay.
I looked at it, and right now, to me, it looks like pretty much the post with no tower building on the top.
Okay. Any idea what the cost is?
Oh, gee. I'm thinking it was over $1 million. But that's that's federal money. It shouldn't be wasted, but they're the ones requiring the new tower.
But it's still taxpayers' money, even if it's,
Yeah, but it is their requirement.
Yeah.
I'm not sure people realize how important that airport is for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, it's connected to EAA,
Right.
and the loss of EAA would have a huge economic impact on this area. But that's also a major anchor for holding Oshkosh Truck, and Oshkosh Truck is related to a large number of suppliers in this area. They use that airport all the time. They had at one time had moved their private jets up to Appleton, but moved back because of the greater ease of arrival and departures at our airport. I would be real worried if we ever lost that airport, that Oshkosh Truck would relocate to the Washington, D.C. area where so many of the contracts are granted.
Interesting.
I think without it in Oshkosh, I would be real nervous about that company and all the suppliers that supply them. So the airport is still subsidized by the county, but there's other important financial aspects for the community that are tied to that airport. Now the goal, you know, I no longer think of that as ever having passenger service or freight service, though from time to time we might look for that. We're thinking of that as more a specialized industrial park, and we're trying to draw, you know, sport aviation related businesses there. And we do have a new one, and I'm sorry to say I've forgotten the name, but they basically assemble Brazilian planes here and sell them, and that's our newest tenant. And I'm thinking they were Eagle or American, but it's not, I don't have the name off the top of my head.
You brought up EAA, so I have a follow-up question. Would you go through the contract you have with the county and EAA for the protection and the security that you provide for them during the week of EAA?
Well, they do get a lot of sheriff services,
Okay,
and they do pay for those.
okay, but not all, right?
But not all. I think there's some traffic control outside the EAA grounds that I think is probably absorbed by the county.
So the contract is not with county executive, it's with the sheriff. There's a long-term contract with EAA? That's what I've been told.
You know, I'll be honest, I don't get involved in those
Okay.
details, but I do remember we just went over we're bringing all the departments in one at a time.
Okay.
And a group of the board, this efficiency committee, is going through their process. And I do remember the sheriff showing the cost of auxiliary officers, and he had another category that had to do with things like Life Fest, Country USA, and his revenues were about 90% of his costs.
Okay, I have a figure that EAA costs the county $65,000 this year, but they were only billed for $24,000. And
I couldn't tell you if that's
so
true
my
or not.
question is, obviously the taxpayers picked up the other $41,000, but I should have asked Sheriff Brooks. And
Yeah, and I'll tell you, that doesn't jive with the numbers the sheriff gave the other
Really?
day, because his costs incurred in these categories that had to do with community events, the revenue was much closer
Okay.
to the total cost there. But perhaps the whole gap belongs to EAA. I
Yeah,
couldn't tell you.
I'm okay.
But so EAA does not pay for the whole amount of sheriff's duties out there then?
My understanding is that they pay for everything on their grounds and at their entrances, but there's some traffic control that the sheriff is involved in that is not compensated by the EAA.
Because, I mean, that just seems a little unfair to me, just sitting back thinking about it, because, you know, I understand traffic, for example, at 9th and the frontage road, but, you know, all of that is increased. I mean, we don't have traffic officers out there directing traffic any other time, unless there's an accident. So why shouldn't EAA pick up the whole cost of that?
I think it's probably a goal to push for, but you know, there's cost and benefits with everything. You know, when there's a Green Bay football game, the traffic on 41 dramatically increases, and probably our patrolling of 41 goes up. We're not going to be compensated for that. You know,
Well, that's an interesting point, but still, you know, I mean, when we're looking at, you know, these groups that come right to our town, I don't know. I think you're just hearing a lot more and seeing a lot more of people jumping up and down and screaming at the top of their lungs about how municipalities should be reimbursed for these costs.
You know, I think it would probably be a goal to look at that, but the other side of that is you don't ask people when there's an accident where the sheriff has to call on them. You don't ask them where they were going and charge it to the restaurant or the theater or wherever they were.
Well, no, but we do pay
coming to
property
or going.
taxes for that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's covered under our property taxes, you know. And going back to a game up in Green Bay, I don't know. Are there extra officers out there on 41 when traffic is headed up north? I don't know that they are.
Well, anytime there's very heavy traffic, there's a higher probability that there'll be some event that the
Well,
sheriff will
sure,
have
but
to
I mean,
be
they're not
called
out there.
for.
I mean, here's a case where they're actually
Sure.
out there, you know, posted at a specific area, and, you know, but for the event, whether it's Country USA or EAA in this case, because it's the county, you know, but for that event.
There's a lot of
We
state
wouldn't be
patrol at
incurring the
EAA
costs.
on the entryways.
Well, I think what you're posing, I agree that the goal should be to match those more closely. I don't have all the details to know
No,
for sure.
well, something
but
for you to talk about with them.
I mean, EAA is not a poor operation.
No, and I do
that's true.
believe you're correct that they're not, that we incur an increase in cost greater than what we bill EAA. But I think the difference is costs away from their grounds. But yeah, I think in theory you're right. If we could figure out a way to get the full amount, I'm not against any revenues right now at all.
Well, I think we should. What's the current status of the lawsuit, you know, involving the county board size reduction?
That's over.
It is, because the last I talked
Right.
with someone, and that was just probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, it sounded like it was still kind of ongoing at that
They
point.
can't
No.
because the statute eliminates the change at this point, doesn't it?
Yeah, you know, the
I didn't mean to
statute.
correct.
No, that's
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah.
The statute was vague on how
Right.
it worked, but my interpretation of what the court seems to have come up with is that it was created a race to the courthouse.
Right.
And then the question came up, was the board saying they were going to cut themselves by 2 sufficient for them to say they won the race to the courthouse?
Right.
Right.
Or was the fact that this group filed petitions before the board completed the
Right.
process, did that mean that group won the race to the courthouse? Well, the way it was initially decided was that the court didn't have jurisdiction, that it should have gone to
The state elections board.
State Elections Board. And the State Elections Board was the one that gave the city attorney the instructions for the clerk not to accept the petitions. So I think effectively it's dead. However, they have another kick at the cat when we hit the next census.
Right.
And of course, that's a time then when it's more logical to change our size because we can change the wards,
Right.
which are kind of the building blocks. You see, we had to accomplish this change without changing the wards, so only a few numbers would work. I believe that they could have gone from 36 to 25. 25 happened to work with reasonable tolerances. Or they could have gone to 19. Now they cut 2 people, went to 36. There's some case law that would indicate that if you do the best you can at minimizing the difference in population, that's acceptable. And that's what they did. They drew up a map without regards for anything except how could they minimize the disparity in population.
Right. Well, I knew they had done all that, and I knew about the, you know, the discrepancy between the state elections board and the court and so forth. But I was just talking to someone 3 or 4 weeks ago who, at least the sense that I got from them was that there was still maybe something hanging out there that still might kind of be in the works.
No, but you know, if the board is smart, they will announce their intention to take another step at reducing board size at the next census. And I actually think what the public really wants is kind of a shakeup of the board. I don't think the number was really what's so critical. There's not a lot of cost savings in reducing the number of board members because they're essentially so low paid that they're more volunteer than employee. You know, they get a per diem for each meeting, and they get a per diem for each committee meetings they go to. But most board members probably make less than $2,500 for all their service.
Do they get sick leave time?
No.
They don't get any.
No, and no benefits.
Okay.
They just, all they really get is per diems and mileage reimbursements. And I know when I was on the board, which was only for 1 year, I think I made about $1,200 from all the meetings I went to. And believe me, nobody would do that for the money because there's just not enough money there.
So the board has been reduced from 38 to 36?
Yeah, and I'm
Okay.
thinking that if they announce their intention to do another cutback at the next census,
Which would be 2012 it would take. They couldn't do it. Census would be 2010. It would take through 2012.
it'd be it would have to be
Yeah.
done for the 2012
Well,
election. They'd have
elections.
less districts.
Okay.
If they could trim it, between 4 and 10 more seats, somewhere in that range, I think the public would accept that. But it's for each individual, the public, to decide. But if the board tries to hold on to this 36 number, then I think there'll be another race to the courthouse. And, the whole thing was a difficult thing for me because I've got to get things accomplished through compromise with the board. And this other issue was kind of a side issue. There wasn't as much substance to it, but the people that wanted the board reduced felt really strongly about it. And the people that didn't want the board reduced felt equally as strongly. So it was kind of putting me in a no-win situation. So I really do hope the board makes another adjustment to their size to show that they're not, they're not just being totally defiant.
Sure. Speaking of the county board, Mark, this year we've lost a couple county board supervisors. Woody Weber, right at the beginning of the year when he was killed in a car accident coming back home from out of state. Recently, there was a gentleman who moved out of his district and he had to vacate his position. Where are we at with openings? Are they all filled now, or are there still some out there that need to be filled?
Dave Albrecht is the county chair, and he has the ability to fill slots when they become vacant. He just appointed a new member to the district on the UWO campus.
Which is the one where the gentleman moved out of the district?
Yes, and I think all the districts are currently
Okay.
full. I do suspect, though, that a number of incumbents will choose not to run the next time, because even though they only reduce the board by 2, it seems to me there's at least 6 districts that will have contested seats, as well as one district that just by pure chance has ended up with 3 board members living in it. Because Woody Weber's appointment, the appointment to fill Woody Weber's slot, happens to live within the geographic boundary set for one of these new districts after the reduction, and that made 3 people fall in that geographic boundary.
Are there any changes within the Oshkosh districts as far as?
Not as much.
Okay.
There are some districts where they lost half of their traditional district and picked up a similar space in an adjacent district.
But no 2 incumbents will have to run against each other, or not?
Actually, I thought that there were a few.
There
Were there?
might be a few,
Okay.
but more of that, it just happened to deal with the fact that the wards are so large in Oshkosh that most board districts only included 2 wards.
Okay.
But the wards were smaller as you got out into the rural areas, and there might have been more wards within a single district because the ward sides weren't uniform. It was the total board district size that were roughly uniform in size. So there was more disruption in some areas than in others.
Okay. When we had talked a couple weeks ago, Mark, you had mentioned to me that the highway department was looking at changing its City of Oshkosh assessment policy with respect to roads. Tell viewers and Dan and I a little bit about that, if you would, and how it impacts City of Oshkosh residents.
Well, I think the policy for a long time has been very inequitable. Some places assess streets, and Oshkosh does that. I believe Neenah does that. I believe Menasha does not, or it may have been that Menasha does and Neenah doesn't. But what was happening is when the county put a road in, they were charging back, the cost for curb and gutter and sidewalk and any other infrastructure work under the street to the city, who then assessed it to the residents. Well, that's fair because those are things they get that the town residents don't. But they were also charging a share of the cost for the road to the city, who was assessing the residents. So imagine a road like County A or County Y, where you've got a mixture of town residents that border the road and city residents. And countywide, for instance, there's one homeowner on the north side of the road in the city of Oshkosh. All the rest is either county property or in the town of Oshkosh. Well, the way they were applying this policy, that one homeowner would pay a share for the street, and other homeowners on his side of the street wouldn't pay anything. And it just wasn't right. So I've asked them, and the highway department has now agreed to adjust their policy so that if we put a road through and we're not charging the town anything for the street, we're not going to charge the city anything for the street. Now, there'll still be significant charges if, take County Y again. If there's a sidewalk on the city side of County Y, and if there's storm lines and water lines that we don't have to deal with on the town side, that we do have to deal with on the city side, those things that the city's getting that the town's not, those will still be billed back to the city, who will bill them back to the residents
Okay.
through assessments. But we're not going to assess city residents anything that the town residents get for free. If the town residents get it for free, then the city residents get that same product for free.
When will this go into effect?
We're in the process of drafting something to clarify that language, and I hope that it goes before the board at their next meeting, if not then at the very next one. But I think County Y will be the first project where that's done. And that actually is the first county project that's in both city and town since I've been made county executive.
I'd like to turn to Madison for a minute.
Okay.
County government is a creature of state government, and many
Yes.
things that state government will do will affect county government.
Yes.
There's a Democratic budget proposal that's light years different than the Republican House Assembly one. Could you kind of share with us and with our viewers where the county stands in those two budgets in terms of impact?
Yeah, and I should say it first, I think both those budgets are political documents. And one focused almost exclusively on not raising any taxes or fees and cutting some taxes. The other one's focus was primarily on trying to do new programs that the public's clamoring for, and trying to give things like local governments and the university adequate funding to continue.
First one is Republican, second one is Democrat. Yeah, okay.
I still have faith that in their conference committee, they're going to come up with a more meaningful compromise.
Like December?
Unfortunately, it'll come very late. I mean, I've already given my department's budget targets in June. They had to submit their written budgets this week, actually. And so we won't really know what we're dealing with until very late in the game.
That's a terrible price for partisanship, isn't it?
It is.
Huh?
It is. And it's a shame that I almost want to eliminate the parties in state government so that they would just work together sooner. But the original question you asked me, how do we fare?
Yeah.
And we fare well under one and very poorly under the other. The assembly budget cuts $208,000 out of our revenue sharing. And that, of course, then shifts down to the local property tax owners or ends up in cuts in county government. The Senate version has a levy freeze formula that's the greater of 4% or new construction. The Assembly version is just new construction. There's no floor in it. So in communities where they don't have any growth, they won't get any increase in revenue. And I don't know how they'll make that work, because while you're under the current mediation arbitration laws, you're not going to hold pay perfectly flat. It's just not possible. Another difference, and this may sound obscure, but it has big effects. The Assembly version of the levy freeze eliminates one of the exceptions that used to be under the levy freeze. And that was that if your cost of debt service went up, you could raise the money to service the new debt outside the levy freeze limits. That's in the Assembly version, it's not in the Senate version. Okay, that has some bizarre effects. If you take a community whose indebtedness is relatively low and they need a large project, I know the sheriff probably talked about needing more space in his jail.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Under the Assembly version, you simply cannot do that without a public referendum. Now, maybe in a small community, a referendum works. But if I have to go to referendum, for instance, a bridge project in Wolf River, do you think I can get a majority vote for a bridge that most people in the county have never seen? For that matter, if I needed a major road project in Neenah, I don't think I could get majority support out of Oshkosh or out of the towns. If I needed to do a major infrastructure project in Oshkosh, I'm probably not going to be able to sell that in the north end. Not because people are prejudiced against each other, but because people are unlikely to support a project on a road they're not familiar with. You know, they have no evidence that it needs to be done. So what I think will happen is that the infrastructure will really get neglected if the assembly version should become law.
Not a good word after I-35 in Minneapolis yesterday, right?
Exactly, and
Yeah.
if anything we know in this country is we've built this huge road system, and everybody's trying to scrimp on the maintenance of it. That's not a good idea from a financial standpoint. Deferred maintenance usually costs more, but there's also a safety impact of that. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. We increased our debt service to do Parkview. We'll actually get reimbursed from that through the Medicaid rate.
Okay.
So what I've told my board is about $1.17 for every $1,000 of value in your home is what you pay for us to service our debt. And that includes, you know, a lot of projects that were already done, like the jail, but it also includes this new Parkview.
Okay.
What I've told the board is I want to kind of draw a line in the sand and stay at that $1.17 level. I'm sorry, $1.17 level, not 100.
That's okay.
Because I feel that's enough, and that's what's prevented. You know, I've gotten the operating tax levy down by dramatically reducing the number of employees, but the total tax rate hasn't gone down because of that increase in the debt service. So I'm saying let's draw a line in the sand. Let's say the $1.17 is as high as we're going to let it get, and then our future reductions in the operating rate will pass through as savings to the taxpayers. But now if you come along with a rule that says if your debt service level increases, you can't pay that without this referendum. Well, then I'm going to be very reluctant to let that rate decline. And this is a real thing, because this year about $3 million worth of projects that we're just about to bond for weren't ready to proceed, so we're pushing them back. Well, when I do the bond issues, there's some leeway in how I structure them, whether the repayment of principal is front-loaded in the first few years or back-loaded in the last 7, 8, 9, 10th year. I'm not going to structure that to have a dip in that debt service rate, because there's kind of a ratchet effect. If I let that rate go down, I can't ever get it back up to do the projects we need to do. So basically, I'm going to have them front-load these new bond issues to keep that right at $1.17. I don't want it to go up, but I'm afraid to let it go down, or else I won't be able to meet the infrastructure needs of the county. So here, I probably would have let that come down a couple of cents if I had the leeway to let it go up and down as seemed appropriate. Now I'm actually going to do just the opposite of what most politicians would want and pay my debt off faster, but by keeping the rate up higher.
Sure.
I don't know whether you want to ask the sales tax question or whether I should follow.
I was going to bring it up.
You're a pinch hitter. Go ahead, follow it up on this.
And then I want to talk about the jail just a little bit. You did make an attempt last year at a 0.5% sales
Absolutely.
tax, and that was, of course, defeated. And then there were other creative ways to balance the budget and that kind of thing.
I would argue that it wasn't balanced. I would argue that there was a $700,000 gap in there.
I chose those words very somewhat facetiously, I'll say. In any event, you know, with the budget crisis that we have at the state level, which is trickling down to the county and the city and the school districts, are we going to see another attempt at a sales tax?
I don't think it makes sense for me to try to do that now. And I probably don't have to for 2008, because when we get into the new Parkview, we get about $600,000 of additional reimbursements. And, you know, this whole process of getting from 2 nursing homes down to 1 has also been a reduction in the number of beds. So you have about 1 employee for every bed you have because you've got to cover it, 24/7. So really there's a downsizing at Parkview that's, probably going to see their full-time equivalents drop probably another 30 FTEs, 30 people, from what was in the budget last year. And that will probably make this budget possible to balance without having a sales tax in it. But, I'm still troubled that people were told a lot of things that weren't true. The budget I put forward had $7.5 million less in property tax in it than the budget we ended up with. And basically, the budget I was proposing kept the amount of sales tax that was projected to come in from people from outside the county, but applied every penny collected locally back to a property tax cut. Now, the opponents of it managed to get people to worry that the sales tax would go in place and they would never see the property tax cut.
Exactly.
But you know what? The resolution I propose cut the property taxes that people paid last November and December and didn't start the sales tax till April 1st. They would have had that property tax cut money in their pocket before the sales tax ever started. And really, think about what's happening. 2 more counties adopted it in the last 2 years. There's only a handful of counties that don't have it. So now when our people go to other counties, they're paying money into those county coffers. But when all those other people come here, and if you can believe the Travel Bureau, and spend $230 million here, we don't take that money. And there's only 2 ways to look at it. Either we're taxing our property owners $1 million more than we have to, or we're providing the county residents with $1 million less in service than we could, or some combination of the 2. And I really don't think it's rational what they've done. But if the county doesn't want the tax, if they feel it's too complicated, it's got other issues, I'm not gonna fight them on that. But I really do think we're overtaxing our property owners to avoid having the sales tax. And when you look at how few counties don't have it, when our residents go to other counties, they don't even know they're paying it in other counties.
No, that's true. That is true. And I give you this much, Mark. I mean, whether someone agrees with the sales tax or disagrees with the sales tax, I will give you a tremendous, high five for the fact that you have the courage of your convictions on this, that you paid for advertising by way of a website, and I don't know if you did anything on radio or newspaper.
I bought $2,000 worth of ads.
You did that out of your own pocket.
Yes.
That is how seriously you believed in this.
Well,
and that I
and
think
still
is,
does. By
yes, and I
Well,
think that's to your credit.
Yeah.
well, I still believe it's the county would be better off with it. However, if the public doesn't want it, I'm not going to force it on them. But from my perspective, I had to lay off 20 people that were working hard doing their jobs to offset that $1 million. And I'm making things work. It's kind of stuck together by baling wire and chewing gum. But there is going to be a point in time where if I have to cut additional people, again, Parkview's giving me that opportunity for 2008, but there'll be some point in time where I'll have to cut some service that's valued by the public. And remember, there's only a few things I've only got 2 kinds of things. The overwhelming majority of the county's expenses are things we are required by law to do from the state. The only things we're not required to do are a few very popular programs, things like the airport and parks, that aren't state mandates, but they're clearly popular with the public. At some point in time, if I have to continue cutting employees, then probably some service that's greatly valued by the public is going to have to go by the wayside. I'm hoping that's years away, but there's only so much you can do. And its healthcare cost is really one of the things that's just killing us. Our self-funded health insurance plan is probably underfunded by more than $1 million right now. Well, a levy freeze formula, at 2%, is barely going to give me $1 million. If it's 4%, it'll be $2 million. That could be consumed by just one of the health insurance pools. And that's something else I brought. I don't think the health insurance plan proposed is going to pass. But La Crosse, who's a similar size to us, La Crosse County, has analyzed that, and they believe that they could cut property taxes by $4 million if that health insurance plan passed, and keep $4 million for the county. And the reason that works is that the county's a generous provider of health insurance. So we don't just cover our employees, we cover all of their spouses and all of their dependents. And the heavy industry has the same problem where they're generous, so they pick up more people. And then companies that don't provide much in the line of benefits basically get a free ride because many of their employees are married or are dependents of people that do have family coverage. Until there's a more equitable distribution of that burden, those that are getting the free ride are going to oppose any change.
Sure. We're down to about a minute and a half here, Mark, maybe 2 minutes tops. So I'm not going to have a chance to ask you the question about the jail, so you luck out on that one. But talking about finances and budgets, can we expect any surprises here with the upcoming budget?
No, I think largely because of the downsizing from 2 inefficient nursing homes to one smaller, more efficient nursing home. I think that's going to do a lot to make our budget work in 2008. It's still going to be a tough budget. The sheriff has told me that there's no way he can meet the target that we gave him. And I think his target was a little bit higher than several other departments, but law enforcement's very expensive. So it's a tough budget, but I think we can do it for 2008. If these constraints remain the same, something's going to give before much longer.
But no real layoffs anticipated with this
Well,
budget?
we're reducing employees all the time, mostly through attrition, but
Well, right, but I mean nothing forced like you had to do last time because of, no sales tax.
well, at Parkview there'll be layoffs because ideally, would you get in a 168-bed facility, you should have substantially less employees than they have now. We've gotten some of those savings already, and we're going to get as many as we can through attrition. But I think some people who are full-time may have to be cut back to part-time, because that's what we really need to get the 24/7 coverage.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Thanks very much for being here, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, thank you for
We
having me
appreciate
on the show.
it so much.
Very
And
informative.
we'll have you back as it probably gets into budget season. So, and Dan, thank
Hey,
you.
thank you, Cheryl.
Thanks to the crew, and as always, thanks to all of you at home. We'll see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got All Right on Oshkosh.
That goes.